Hey guys, Chris Williams here. If you are a fan of the Badass Agile podcast or the Fuse Chamber podcast, one of the things I get asked about is how I get the sound that I get, and I love geeking out on this stuff. This makes me super happy, so I just thought I would show you. And I'll start with the high end method. The high end method requires that you buy, in this case, a piece of hardware called the Universal Audio Apollo, and you can get it in 2 input version or an 8 input version, and the prices range from I want to say around 1,000 to maybe 3,000 US dollars, depending on your configuration. But they've released a new one. My understanding it's around 500 US, with a little bit less processing power, and it actually comes with a bunch of some of the plugins I'm going to show you included. So the cost is really coming down, but this does require a purchase. Now, do you need this thing in order to make a great sounding podcast? No. And in a future podcast, I'm going to show you how to go completely without the Apollo and how to do it all in the box using commercially available plugins that are much lower cost. Does this make it easier for you to get a super sexy tone? Absolutely. All right. So this is what the setup sounds like with nothing on it. I just turned the bass back on. So this is just neutral tone microphone. This is a Shure SM7B plugged straight into the Apollo with no processing at all. The first thing I'm going to do is grab, what this allows you to do, by the way, this allows you to grab models of classic preamp hardware. Now, it's all fine and well to have a great microphone, but if you don't have a great preamp as well, a lot of the microphone's qualities are going to be lost. You can't really take advantage of what the mic does. So you can have a $3,000 microphone, but if you have crappy preamps, it really won't matter. So what this does is model some of the preamp units that are highly regarded, classically well-known, and what it does is it allows you to place them between the microphone and, if you wish, the your recording system. So whether you use Logic, whether you use Pro Tools, it doesn't matter. It allows you to create an instance of these virtual preamps, if you like, and you record straight to your digital audio workstation as if those preamps were actually connected to your microphone. Now, are they exact? A lot of people, in a blind test can't tell the difference. Some people say there's a tiny difference, and some people say there's a major difference, but they really are sweet sounding emulations. So, but you pay for them. So let's try them out. The first one I'll show you is one I use a lot, and it's called the Manley Vox Box. Here's the Manley Vox Box. Bring the volume up a bit. Now, this is a great sounding unit. I like this one because it's an emulation of a tube-based microphone preamplifier, and I have it cranked right up right now. It has a beautiful equalizer section, and I have a preset ready-made for this, by the way. So the nice thing about the Vox Box is you can turn the equalizer on or off, and it's got this really great sounding EQ. It's impossible to make it sound bad. Let me crank the bass up so you can hear it. That's what it sounds like with the bass cranked all the way up. Put it back. I also use what's called the mid dip, which is there's a kind of a woolly soundings here. If I turn it all the way off, you can hear that the low end is a little bit boomy, so you can take it all out or just take some of it out. And then where I find for my vocal, for a male sound, I love 1.5 kilohertz. Now, if you don't understand equalizers, don't worry. I'm going to come back to that topic later, but just keep that in mind. I like to add some sub bass. I like to add or remove some 200 hertz and then 1,500 hertz or 1.5 kilohertz. I like to add some mid-range. See what the mid-range does? Now, this is too much, but even with too much, it doesn't sound awful. But I like to add a healthy amount of 1.5K to my voice. It makes it sound more forward, makes it sound a little more aggressive. One of the advantages of the Manley Vox Box has one of the best sounding de-essers in the business. So, for example, this microphone, you'll hear, let me turn it off so you can hear the sound of the CH sound. Now let's put the de-esser in. Without. In. Hopefully you can hear a bit of difference there. It's a great sounding de-esser. I love using it. And that's the Voxbox. Another one that's similar, where you might like the sound of it better or worse, is another classic device called the Neve 1073. This is a console that was used extensively on records that were made throughout the 70s and 80s. It has a very, very classic rock sound to it. Does that apply to vocals for a podcast? I personally don't think so. I don't like it as much. Let's check it out. So with this one, you'll hear it sounds a little thinner, maybe a little more trebly or nasal, but it has beautiful sounding equalizers. Let's take the top end and let's just boost it so you can hear what the top end sounds like on this one. So if you want to have a nice airy sound, you'll agree this is what it sounds like with none. So that's kind of neutral. And I usually would put it maybe up about here. The mid-range I find is a little complicated, and when you turn it up, you'll agree that this sounds a little nasal, not particularly beautiful. But if I bring it closer to my treasured 1.5 kilohertz, where I like to boost my voice, it sounds a little bit less aggressive, a little less, it just sounds thick and a little bit nicer. So I would set that maybe down here. And then maybe I'd remove a little bit, as always, around the 200 hertz. I'd take it a little bit out. So here's me removing it. And let's hear what it sounds like without. So this is with no treatment whatsoever. And this is with the equalizer punched back in. Great sounding preamp, not necessarily for solo voice. Inside a rock mix, totally different story. Let's try another one. This is another one by the same maker, the Neve 88RS, and you'll hear it almost instantly. It has got a much rounder sound. You can hear it's not as nasal, not as bright. Even if I kick in the equalizer and add a little bit of high end, I think you'll find it's not as strident. It's a very pretty sounding top end, and then the midsection is not bad. I'll grab some of my favorite here, my 1.5, and I'll give it a little bit of a boost, and you can hear it. It's not as nice as the Voxbox, but it works. At least not for my voice. I'll take up my my 200 here. Somewhere in here I'll remove a little bit. And this is without the equalizer. This is with the equalizer. Now, this is one of the channel strips that has something called a compressor built into it. A compressor, I'll do a separate episode on compression, but a compressor is just a squisher. It makes the soft parts loud, and it makes the loud parts quiet. So let me show you how a compressor works. We kick in the compressor. And just look at these, look over here where it says this is the what they call the gain reduction meter, which is basically how much am I squishing meter. So if you see it light up a little, we're squishing a little. If you see it light up a lot, we're squishing a lot. Let's try it. So I'll drop what's called my threshold, which is where does the squishing kick in. And you'll see already, there we go. Can you see it? See how they're lighting up here? Okay, that's way too much. And I'll set a really conservative setup, and hopefully you can hear it. Let's go to about here. So that's a nice, you'll notice that if I talk really quietly, so this is with, if I talk really quietly without the compressor, you can barely hear it. If I put the compressor back in, you should be able to hear it a little bit better. Now, if I talk really loudly, it doesn't go quite as loud as it would if I had the compressor off. Put the compressor back in, and you'll see, you can see it right here. It's nowhere near as loud as when I turn the compressor off. It's much louder without the compressor. So the compressor makes the signal quieter in loud spots and louder in quiet spots. So having this built in is a really great way of making sure that the signal that you send to your recorder is more even, because there's nothing worse than having little quiet parts that you can barely hear and really loud parts that blow up your speakers. When someone's playing your podcast in the car or on the go with a lot of background noise, the quiet parts will basically disappear. Okay, so this is a really great sounding preamp. Here's another one. The API Vision Strip is a beautiful sounding unit. Also used on a lot of rock records and very much 70s, 80s kind of vibe. If I take the equalizer on this, have a listen to the high end. High end is very, very sweet. Really, really nice. Likewise, my 1.5 kilohertz, good aggressive sounding equalizer. So let me go in and pull out some of that 200K. Make sure my mid-range is nice and punchy. And you should be able to hear the difference without the equalizer and then with the equalizer. Hopefully you can tell the difference there. Okay. This one has a compressor as well, which I'll turn off, but here's the compressor. We can see it working once again. So here I'll choose a high ratio. Go with a low threshold. You should see my squishing lights lighting up here pretty soon. And once again, the really loud signals, this is with the compressor. This is without the compressor. This is with the compressor. This is without. Let's try the low signals. The very low signals are down here. With the compressor in, they should seem a little bit louder and a little fuller. All right, so let's leave the compressor off. The other cool feature I want to show you is called a gate. What a gate does is it shuts all the background noise off when you're not talking. Check this out. You hear the difference? Now it sounds like all I did is turn the signal off, but watch this. When I start talking, it opens the gate back up. When I stop talking, the gate closes. Isn't that cool? And you can make it sound as natural as you want by playing around with some of these switches. Now again, we can have a whole separate discussion about how to make this work so that it sounds as natural as possible. But something like this would probably be pretty good. You don't have to use it, but I think you'll agree that it most definitely doesn't affect the sound in a negative way, but it takes all the background noise out when you're not talking. Very cool. Now here is the final preamp I'm going to show you is one of the ones that can be had for fairly cheap, and it usually comes when you buy an Apollo, it usually comes with it. So this would technically be free or included in the price. Listen to how punchy this is. Without putting any equalizer on it, in fact, it doesn't really have an equalizer section. So there's really no frills, there's no compressor, there's no gate, there's no nothing, just a beautiful sounding preamp with tons of gain. And it's got a really great edge that I like a lot. So I actually use this one, even though it's not the fanciest. Now, in the case that you have one of these preamps, or if you want to use no preamp at all, or if you want to use a preamp but you don't like the equalizer section, you could actually grab one of the Universal Audio equalizers and add your own tonal shaping to it. So here, in addition to getting the sound of those vintage preamps, I could get the sound of some vintage hardware equalizers that have a really interesting character all their own. So this one would allow me to add a little bit of bass. Hopefully you can hear it. This is without, and then punch the bass back in. You should hear a little bit of a boost there. And this is a mid-range equalizer where I've got the 1.5 range all set up, and I've got quite a bit of boost on that. Let's have a listen. This is with the mid-range boost kicked in, and this is with it removed. As always, I've removed a little bit of that 200 hertz that I find in my voice gets a little bit foggy. And so without using any equalizer or having a preamp that has an equalizer built into it, I can grab one of the Universal Audio EQs and add them to the signal chain if you like. And the same thing applies with compression. Let me remove these and show you. If I'm worried that this signal is not loud enough and I don't want to send it to tape or to the recording workstation, if you will, without some compression on it, but this one doesn't have a compressor, I can go grab one of the other compressors available from the Universal Audio library. One of my favorites to use on my voice is called the LA2A. And I use it so that it just takes some of the peaks off. You can see the squish meter is not going very far here. This would be too much squish. and I would have to add too much volume. You can see that sounds squishy, doesn't it? Like the really quiet things are way too loud and the really loud things are way too quiet. It's taken all the dynamic range out. So I would set the peaks more like here. So it's just doing a little bit of squishing. Not, watch how much the meters go up when I turn, watch, I'll turn this all the way up. Look how the squish meter is going. You see how the squish meter went all the way over to the left? You don't want that. All right. So something like this, just some subtle compression would do. Something like this. Just to make sure that it goes to tape loud enough, but not too loud. Now, one of the things you never want to do is send the signal to the digital audio workstation with an overage. So for example, watch this button here. This is the console app that comes with the Universal Audio, and it's not a recorder, it's just a mixer to let you control your signals. It'll tell you if your signals are so loud that it does what's called clip or distort. Check this out. I'm going to clap my hands, so you might want to turn your speakers down. So you'll notice that it went all the way up to the top, the loudest that the system can possibly handle, and it is clipped. Let me do it again. Okay. What we could do there is add a different kind of plug-in, which is called a hard limiter. A limiter makes sure that it doesn't really compress things in a nice or interesting way. It just makes absolutely sure that anything over a certain volume level gets squished right down really, really quickly. So let me show you how it works. If we grab the precision limiter, and this is a different looking, so bear with me, it's a different looking tool, but check it out. You're looking, this is the squish meter here. So you can see right now it's doing no squishing. As I'm talking away, no squishing whatsoever. If I turn it off and I clap, watch what happens. So watch down here, watch the clips. All right, so that one clipped. Punch this back in and watch what happens with the clips this time. No clip, but it took 7 decibels off of my hand clap sound. So it squished it by 7 decibels, which is kind of significant. So this is one thing you can put on your chain at the end to safeguard and make sure that all the signal that goes into your recorder is never so loud that if you play it back, you're like, uh-oh, I goofed. I have to redo the whole thing. Because the sound of a clip can actually ruin a recording. So everything you need is right here. Now the downside of using this system, aside from the cost, and by the way, all of the plugins that I was just showing you are anywhere from about 150 US to 300 US or more. They frequently can be had on sale, but if you really need one and it's not on sale and you pay full price, this system can get very expensive very quickly. So next time I'm going to show you how to do everything I just did without any of these expensive tools that are literally 80 to 90% as good. All right, so I hope that helped clarify. This is what I use when I record most of the time, but in a pinch or when I'm mobile recording, I use a completely different setup that's far more efficient and would cost far less money, and I think it produces almost identical results. So I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about the Universal Audio tools and some of the plugins and what they can do to affect your sound. Cheers, guys. We'll talk next time.